Welcome to Make More Money. In this show, we're talking with leaders who have woven or are weaving character-based capitalism into their company culture and value proposition for a distinctive competitive advantage. Character-based capitalism is not just about making more money. It's really about building trust between consumers and suppliers and really doing what's right for all stakeholders, which then deepens relationships that lead to business sustainability. Today's topic is cost reduction, a primary responsibility for building sustainability. Our guest today is Joe Szuba, the president and principal of National Cost Reduction Corporation, a niche consulting firm that evaluates, negotiates, and reduces G&A expenses in all industry channels, which then saves clients up to 20% annually. Joe brings his passion, creativity, and energy to his business through his focus on the customer and his experience in positioning businesses to compete in rapidly changing external environments. Joe's background includes that he was executive vice president for Carson Peary Scott, where he covered marketing, operations, as well as quality process and training. He was also a senior vice president for marketing with Sibley's, right?
Right.
Okay, which is an upscale, upstate New York department store chain. Try that a couple times. He was also divisional sales manager with the Higbee Corporation, Cleveland's truly premier upscale, privately held full-line department store. He was also, though, a CEO of Accents Chicago, which is a privately held upscale gift and souvenir company with 6 retail stores, a wholesale operation, as well as a special events division. Joe has extensive experience as well in trade associations and nonprofits. As a director for Gift for Life, it's the Chicago Boys and Girls Club, and also the Better Business Bureau of Chicago. Joe, thanks for being here. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, so would you please tell us a little bit about your business and how you got to where you are?
Well, when you're in retail, everything's negotiable. So we've been negotiating expenses, as you know, for years, and my partner and I both came out of heavy experience department store retailing. Right. And expense reduction is a way of improving your cash flow and your bottom line. And there are about 20-25 expense categories that we focus on, and our purpose is to renegotiate and lower those costs for our clients. Our company is 12 years old. We work in the greater Chicago area, the 7 counties, and we work in the profit and nonprofit sector.
Well, when we met a couple of years ago, I was really impressed by the level of detail and the specificity which you get into in terms of looking at the operational details of a company. So how does your approach help your clients then make more money?
First of all, we're independent. So our fees come from the savings that we bring to our clients. And we're free to move about and pick suppliers that we think are best for our clients. We do the homework, the client makes the decision. So we make no decisions for our clients. We do all of that background homework. And we look at expenses. We do an assessment of their current expense structure, who are they buying from, how much are they spending. We prepare a forecast of savings, all of this under a confidentiality agreement.
Right.
And we're always working with their numbers. So when we come back to them after a period of some negotiating, we're working with their expense numbers and their suppliers. And our goal is really to see if we can find savings with their current suppliers if they're happy with their current suppliers.
So essentially, really, you're not a typical supplier or consultant, but you're really a partner.
Right, absolutely. Right. We really don't even consider ourselves a consultant because when you say that, you're thinking of billable hours. And
right.
We don't have billable hours. We have fees that come from the savings that we deliver and we document to our clients.
Well, what I've always enjoyed about talking with you and also with your model, it's really a pay for performance.
Right, absolutely.
Namely, if you can't find the savings, you're not really getting paid.
We don't get paid, right.
So, I mean, so there's the motivation right there to really get into the details and understand their business. But when you do this, do you find that there are other inefficiencies in addition to not just the fact that they may be paying too much and they can be saving a lot, but what other things do you find when you're out there, Joe?
Well, typically, we always work with the CFO in a for-profit and the executive director in the non-for-profit, and they say something to us like, if you see anything else, let me know. And we have found some things. We worked with a non-for-profit that was still copying checks. And the front of the check, the back of the check, one copy went to membership, one copy went to their accounting department, the check was filed in another place, and we said, whoa, this is the digital age, there's a better way to do it. So we have a very open relationship with that CFO, and we do find some of those things
Right.
when we look at expenses.
Well, as you know, in past Make More Money programs,
Right.
we've talked about leaders creating the right culture through which they empower their employees to do the best job that they can do for what they're being employed to do, right? So how does what you do with NCRC then help the leaders build that culture?
Well, first of all, we're very transparent, we're very honest, as my partner and I are, and we bring that to the table, and we're very proud of that fact. Everything we do, we document, so it is documented on an Excel spreadsheet. We give it to the client to approve, so the process is we document, the client approves. And we work within the entire division of that expense division. And many times you're crossing over multiple people responsibilities. Rarely does an organization have one person responsible for 20 expenses.
Right.
You've got three or four. So
Right.
we cross all those silos and we work with all of them. And the CFO explains to all those people who we are and why we're doing it. It's not a reflection of their performance. It's a third party. It's independent. We have a very tight timeline process. And they don't have the time to do it to the extent that we do, and the
Right.
consistency.
Well, I think, but that's also why they employ you,
Right.
for your expertise.
Right.
And the fact that you've done this in numerous companies in different channels,
Right.
different industries. So, I mean, you're coming in with this very rich experience and perspective that you would think that they want to tap into and really capitalize upon in a relatively short period of time. Because let's face it, they wouldn't be able to hire you and bring you onto their staff. They couldn't afford you.
Right, right. And many times, Ray, they are looking at expenses as a percent to sales. They may look at their office supplies and say, well, it's 2%. That's a good number.
Yeah.
But beneath that number, there are savings opportunities.
Right.
And we look at that, and we're getting down to the actual item, the SKU number, looking at pads and folders and chairs and file cabinets. And that's where the savings are. We drill down to that level, and that's really what the business is all about.
Well, I think, we've talked before about the whole brain leadership perspective of building a culture, and the right brain versus left brain. And I know some CEOs or CFOs would be be excited about that because now they're getting down to the details and somewhat analytical left brain.
Right.
But really, you're really teaching, though, the employees about a whole different way to look at their business. And it's not just about the numbers, although that's the outcome
Right.
of them looking at their processes much differently.
And when we negotiate a lower cost, that's an immediate impact to the organization. They were paying $1 for something,
Yeah.
we get it for 80 cents. The next time that supplier invoices, they're going to invoice at 80 cents. So we've got a very, very visible, very concrete, documented savings.
The immediate returns.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. And instead of waiting for the next quarter to show up.
Right.
Well, and in fact, that goes right back to, in your experience then, what you're doing, how many of them actually then change their processes and their practices as a result of what you're discovering?
Well, if we work with a current supplier who reduces their cost, that's perfect because they stay with the current supplier. Current supplier says, I'll reduce my cost because I want to improve I want to have a good relationship with this client. And the cost goes from $1 to 80 cents. That's immediate. They stay with that current supplier. If we bring a new supplier to the table and we do all that due diligence and we meet with that supplier, make sure they can maintain or improve the service levels, make sure they can maintain that price for at least a year, then we bring that supplier to the client, and the client makes the decision to move with that new supplier. So we're bringing that to the client to improve their cash flow.
Well, now we're talking about relationships.
Right.
And do you find that there's some resistance by some leaders to move away from a supplier that they've had for X number of years? Or do they look at this all of a sudden this new knowledge that you've just shared with them that, hey, this supplier could have been charging you less, but necessarily wasn't really thinking in your best interest, only thinking in their best interest? Do you find they're ready to then jump ship and then go with a new supplier?
The answer is yes and yes. And sometimes, Ray, the supplier provides a product that's so unique to the business that there may be specs involved with it. There may be a product that's specifically designed for that client, and nobody wants to move away from that supplier. There's been years of work done, and what we're trying to do is to see if we can get a little more savings. Maybe the terms are net 30. Can they go to 210 or 230? So we're looking at other opportunities that are part of the cost, but not necessarily the cost of the product.
So essentially, this isn't just about the cost of the product, but this is really a talk about the cost of the relationship, really, and the value to the company to either sustain that relationship, but at much better terms.
Yes.
To be fair to all,
Right.
okay, to be fair to the supplier as well as to the customer.
I'll give my perfect example is we had a manufacturer that made paper cups in St. Charles, and they were buying 37 different petroleum products, greases, oils, lubricants. When we went to that supplier, he wanted to look at what they were buying, what they bought last year, what they bought this year, and to see if he had any margin that he would give up, or if he could get a better price from his supplier and bring it to the client. And when he came back, we went through item by item, and some of the items he could reduce, 30 cents a gallon, whatever. Other items he said, no, last year they bought a lot of 50,000 gallons, and this year they only bought 20,000.
Right.
And he couldn't cut the price. But the point is that we want to engage that supplier in thinking about cost reduction for this client, for a mutual client. So drilling down to that level, when we got the results back, there were some zeros in there. There were no savings in cost, but that's part of our business.
Well, in fact, this goes right back to the discussion we had about character-based capitalism, doing what's right for all stakeholders.
Right.
And so you're doing what's right for the supplier because you're doing collaboration, a collaborative approach, I should say, to how you can best supply or support your client, but also to help that supplier sustain their enterprise as well.
Right. Yeah, and we represent the client. So our motive of operation is that we're pleasant and we're persistent. But we do represent the client, and that's we want to foster. We want to improve that relationship. We're not trying to destroy a relationship. And sometimes a supplier just doesn't have enough margin to cut his price.
Well, now this goes back to emotional intelligence that we were talking about in one of our previous, programs, because you've got to sense that there's this relationship, and so you're trying to sustain that, not destroy it.
Right.
And so that's really where your whole approach to relationship building and being empathetic and understanding of the situation is absolutely crucial. So this is really a right brain approach, although you're using left brain tactics, so to speak, and practices and processes.
Right.
This is really a right brain leadership approach to helping your clients do a much better job with resources they have.
And sometimes we at the end of a conversation we may say to that supplier, what can you do for the mutual client? From your perspective as a supplier, what can you do? And we've had a couple of cases where a supplier came back and said, well, if the client could do this, I could reduce my cost 1 or 2 points. And we're the messenger, and we take that to the client and say, this supplier will reduce their cost 2 points, 2%, if you can do this. And the question becomes, can that client do that? And that's the decision that the client makes. But we're the messenger, and we make sure we understand the service levels, and then we make sure we understand the cost opportunities. Yeah,
so you're really looking at a much broader and deeper perspective in terms of the business. It's not just about reducing the costs.
Right.
But again, and one of the reasons why we've had this discussion around character-based capitalism and where your company comes into play is the fact that you're really a bridge. And you say you're the messenger, but I really see that more than that. You're really connecting the client and the supplier at a much higher level of discussion and conversation and collaboration than existed prior to that.
Yes.
Because many times they were only looking at it in terms of a transaction, and you're really helping them build that relationship.
Yes.
For this long-term sustainability of the enterprise.
Absolutely.
And that's really where I see the greatest connection with character-based capitalism, doing what's right for all stakeholders.
Right.
It's not just for the client that you're serving, but also the suppliers as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't want to put anybody out of business.
Right.
But if there's an opportunity to save 1 or 2 points, I mean, we typically look at 15 to 18 expense categories. Okay. And in there, sometimes there are no savings. Not every category has savings. We come back to our client and say, savings in this category are 0.
Yeah.
But in this category, we're going to save you 12%.
Right.
And as we say, there's no pot of gold. We don't find all the savings, $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 in any one expense line. Our business is to look at 12 to 15, 18 expense categories, negotiate, communicate, and then see what we can find and bring to our clients.
Well, like I said, though, it's the synergistic effect, right?
Right.
It's a cumulative effect of really doing this deep analysis. And that's, I think, the value that we bring to our whole community here, is to let them know, number one, that they have you and Len as a resource to whom they can, and it doesn't cost them a cent.
Right.
Really.
Right.
You know, to do this.
And that's the fun from our perspective is that, you know, we work in every industry. We're in manufacturing, we're in distribution, wholesale, retail, non-for-profit, restaurants. Everybody has G&A expenses.
Right.
The specific expenses vary by a business. You know, if we do a church or a temple, they don't have freight, they don't have packaging, you know, they don't have corrugated boxes. So the expense categories do vary, but there are savings out there, especially in this competitive market.
Well, I'll tell you, Joe, I would love to continue this conversation, but as you all know, we've got a limit on our time. So before we end, could you please share with the audience how they can get in touch with you and how, you know, they can really capitalize upon your knowledge?
Our company is a National Cost Reduction Corporation. I'm the president, Joe Szuba. They can call me at my cell, 312-925-0489. My email is joe@nationalcostreduction.com. Be glad to answer any phone calls. I answer all my calls.
Okay, Joe, thanks so much
Ray,
for being
thanks
our
so
guest on our show today.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Ray. Thank you.
And we look forward to the next time, the next installment. Join us again for Make More Money Through Character-Based Capitalism.